Yeah.
Hello.
Hi. So, one of the things I just want to note is we are actually recording this on Friday the 13th. And
Oh, yes.
I have no studies to back this up. So, just bear with me. But I just thought it was interesting. There was somebody on uh, I think I saw this on the talk. So, on TikTok. She was talking about how Friday in the English language is named for the goddess Freya. So a
Yes.
female goddess. It's also in Spanish and French for Venus. Um, Vendredi, Viernes. But that the 13th, the number 13 has come to mean like a negative or a bad luck. But
Mm.
in, I don't know, in times when women were venerated, 13 was the number of cycles that a woman would have in a year. So there's actually 13 moon cycles in a year.
Oh.
And so Friday the 13th was a day for women.
You
Now,
know, that is really interesting. And I'm just going to interject for two
mhm,
seconds
yeah.
because today I was doing my little archaeology looking around. Because I get a lot of newsletters, and one of them randomly showed a sculpture of a woman from 20,000 years ago, and she has a horn in one hand, and it's like sculpted as part of a rock, and I think it's only like this big. And it was saying talking about exactly what you just said, because it said that there were like 13 marks on her abdomen, and how the some pope took one off and made it 12 months, or it was somehow relating it to the calendar. I don't really know, but it was because I only read it for 2 seconds and then I closed it. But it's really weird that you are mentioning that because that this is not planned. So, yeah.
No, we
Wow.
hadn't discussed this beforehand. The other thing that I always think about is people talk about, even if we go to a pope and stuff and Christianity, they talk about Christ and his 12 disciples. Well, that's 13 people.
Mhm. Oh, yes, it's true. Very true.
The other story that I'd heard, again, I have not done the scholarly research, but the other story about Friday the 13th being viewed as a bad luck day was that it was on a Friday the 13th that the Pope um, deconsecrated or whatever the Knights Templar, and they were free to be attacked. And it started on
Mm.
a Friday the 13th. And since the
Oh.
Knights Templar had been the first sort of banking system of what we might term a more modern
Hmm.
era in Europe, and we still subscribe to this capitalist system, it was deemed a bad luck day because essentially the bank was
Oh,
deemed
the
free to be
banks.
attacked.
Right.
Now, again, I have no idea. For me, the idea about Freya and the 13 cycles rings the most true.
Hmm.
But I've heard the thing about the Knights Templar for years. Maybe at some point I'll go look it up. But I just wanted to note that I have often thought of it Friday the 13th as a lucky day. And we have something like 3 of them this year. So I say enjoy the day, enjoy the next one coming up, and know that you have the power to change the meaning of things based on your own belief systems.
Fight the patriarchal construct, I say.
Yes, yes,
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
sure. And we are coming up on spring. So when we were
Mhm.
talking about this, Katie has done a deep dive into celebrations of the spring equinox. I, continuing on my whole fight the patriarchy kind of concept, wanted to look at how um, the Catholic Church in particular had ingratiated itself in some ways, you might say, by co-opting a number of indigenous or pagan belief systems that they didn't necessarily carry into their practice in order for it to be all considered part of the Holy and Apostolic Church. So these are some of the directions we're going. They sometimes come together, they sometimes diverge. We hope you will enjoy our conversation. So Katie, you want to take it away?
Okay. So my focus was spring equinox because it's coming up. And I just wanted to look at sort of ancient traditions and kind of myths surrounding. Um, I'm going to also look at it from a Asia Buddhist uh, view, and how they celebrate. Um, and then I think later I have some just recommendations on how all of us how we can incorporate spring activities based on a little bit of traditional Chinese medicine, which might be fun. So spring is, I think everyone feels like it's like a rebirth, fertility. There's also, particularly in Asia, it's a very defeat the demons time. There's a bit of a dark element to it, that's still practiced today. But something that I've always loved, and it's actually a Persian tradition, called now it's New Year Nowruz, and it's on the spring equinox, and I've always loved it because there's so much symbolism to it, and it's been practiced for 3,000 years, and it's not just Persian, that it's many countries, even Mongolia, Central Asia, Azerbaijan. There's many countries, that practice Nowruz, but the Persians have something called a Haft Sin table. So the number, because you were talking about number 13, so this is actually the number 7 is very important in this context. And so they put 7 items on a table, and each item starts with their letter S. I'm not even going to try to say it. It looks so pretty, and I always really admire this tradition. So there's usually always a mirror, and that's for reflection and clarity for the year ahead. Then there's apples for beauty and health. There's the painted eggs. That's for fertility and continuity. Goldfish in like a bowl, not just out on the table. And that represents the flow of life and represents Pisces. I thought you'd like that.
I do.
Um, there is a fruit, dried fruit, and I don't know what is. It's called sea buckthorn. Have you heard of that? And it represents love and wisdom. There are coins, obviously prosperity. Then they have always these sprouted greens, like a little thing of sprouted greens, and that's for rebirth. There's a sweet wheat pudding for strength and bravery. And there's usually hyacinth. That's very pretty flower. Garlic or vinegar. And that is supposed to remind us that growth requires patience and protection. And sumac, you know that spice. It's like a red berry, and then it's ground down, very tart, and that is for tolerance and patience. It's a lovely table, um,
How
and
did you first come across this table, this
I think
concept?
because my friend is half Persian, and so from Smith, so and I somehow picked up on it, and it always stuck with me. I just think I'm really into symbolism, like what that people nowadays put on a table, and it means something from like
Mhm.
generation. And I think, um, and I just think it's such a lovely tradition. I just always
The
loved
num
it.
I have a friend who I want to go and ask who's also half Persian. She's half Persian and half Jamaican, and I'd love to
Oh,
ask her.
wow. That's quite a combo.
Her mom was the Persian one, so I know that she actually grew up with quite a few of the traditions. So I
Oh,
wanna
that's
ask her
nice.
about it.
Yeah.
I don't know how
Yeah.
much she, um, incorporates them, but I'm pretty sure she
Mm.
would have experienced it. But the number 7,
Mm.
took me to two places. One was the Feast of the Seven Fishes,
Oh,
which
yes.
I've
Mhm.
only ever heard about. Like I've never experienced one. And the other is I don't know if this is just in fantasy or if it happens elsewhere, but it's the trope of like the seventh daughter of the seventh daughter or the seventh son of the seventh son, and that being sort of this magical
Mm.
imbuing
Mhm. Mhm.
of something.
Yeah.
Normally, there's trials and tribulations before you um,
Yeah.
are
Yep.
successful, but it was just interesting how across times
Mhm.
and places you can have similar aspects show up. Like
Mhm.
just for an example, that number.
Yeah. Something about 7, I think.
Mhm.
It's like it travels beyond cultures, isn't it? It just makes you wonder.
It does, and
Mhm.
I also think about the fact that Prince was born on the 7th of June. So, I
Oh,
mean,
was
it's
it?
6. Mhm.
Oh.
And I just think of him, Mr. King Purple, but, I
Yes.
actually think of him in some ways as a modern wizard. Like, when you think about how incredibly musical, like,
Mm.
the number of instruments he played, like, the different types
Mhm.
of music he wrote, like, all of that, and how way before like, modern times, you see a lot more young men do that androgynous aspect, and I'm not saying there weren't men
Mhm.
before, but I feel like Prince in our generation, like, I kinda feel like Bowie's a little before us,
Mhm. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Prince just feels very much like I know he's older than us, but just very much of our generation, like, somebody who embodied that very masculine, but also androgynous
Yeah.
kind of
I
thing.
think that's true. He was very sexual, wasn't he? Like it was a
Mhm.
very sexual energy, male sexual energy, but in this kind of androgynous form, which I find really unusual that but I think it says a lot about his talent that he could bring that and maintain that persona because I wonder how many musicians, you know, are not their real genuine selves in order to sell an album. But Prince, I think he seems to have really stuck to his, true
And
self.
the more he did, the more he was never I shouldn't say never. I would say that he was popular, it seems, for people who admired authenticity.
Mm,
And
mhm,
definitely from what I understand, I'm not a musician, but from what I understand from people who are, he
mm,
was like practically venerated in the
mm.
sense of his musicality. But I think about the fact that he's a Gemini, so it's a dual sign.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And then the modern guy who's done something similar, who's Bad
Mm,
Bunny. I don't know if he's done something similar on the musical level yet. He's still young, but in terms of that very masculine but androgyny aspect and that staying true to
mm,
himself, bringing forth his culture is Bad Bunny.
hmm,
And he's a Pisces,
hmm.
which is another dual sign.
I have to
Um,
say I had never heard of him until the Super Bowl, so I don't know him very well.
well, I can't say that I know him well. Prior to I mean, I knew him before the Super Bowl,
Mm,
just
mm,
because the album that won Album of the Year this year was an album that really did sort of a tour de force of modern Puerto Rican music, and
ah,
I really enjoyed it. I also some of the themes and the concepts really call, I think, to those of us in
mm,
the diaspora,
mhm,
um, because of it goes beyond nostalgia, it goes to the just appreciation of the island and its people and what they have been through and are going through.
mm,
Um, but like when he was very much in his very specific reggaeton sign,
mhm,
I might have heard maybe a song or two, but it just
mm,
wasn't. It's kind of like if you played a bunch of like electronic, no words, dance music, that wasn't my thing either. And that's kind of like, like I'd heard it, but I couldn't tell you anything about it. That was a little bit
Yeah.
like reggaeton. Like I'd heard it. There were a few songs that I know, other ones that I don't. But I didn't know him from that.
Mm,
So
mhm,
I can't
mhm.
say that but I was seeing him even in popular American culture. And some of what they commented on is he was part of that crew of modern guys who they unironically wear skirts, wear like
Oh, yeah,
flowy
yeah.
blouses, kind of like things that I don't know if Prince wore skirts, but he definitely wore flowy blouses and high heels
Mhm,
and
mhm.
and
Yep.
there's a whole crew of young men who were doing this as part of the fashion world
Mm.
most recently. Um and he was one of them. He was one of the ones. And because he's Puerto Rican, um I made note of him. Kind of like I make note of Bruno Mars, who has a new album coming out. Bruno Mars's dad is from Puerto Rico, grew up in the Bronx. We have this thing in Puerto Rico. I can't say that everybody does this, but I would say my family is definitely of you can have a drop. We've adopted you. You are ours. You're Puerto Rican, you're Puerto Rican, you're Puerto Rican. It's kind of like you're a cousin, you're a cousin, you're a cousin. So yes. So there's
Isn't
a
he
whole
from Hawaii?
yeah. But
Yes.
I think you and I have talked before when the United States was taking over Hawaii was at the same time that they were colonizing Puerto Rico. And those m- European descendant men who were looking to make a lot of money in Hawaii offered jobs to people because they completely devalued the Puerto Rican currency at the time when they took over. And so people could not buy, they were hungry. They could not buy food. So they offered them a chance to travel to another island. I don't know how clear they were that the island was on the other side of the world and that they would have no way to get back. But there were hundreds of Puerto Ricans who were taken to Hawaii to help them learn to plant pineapple and sugarcane in Hawaii. So there's
Yeah.
a whole contingent of Hawaiians of Puerto Rican descent.
Mm. I thought he was from Hawaii because
He
I
is.
think he's proudly Hawaiian. I didn't realize
He,
he was Puerto Rican
and Filipino. I think
ethnicity.
his mom, I think, traces
Hmm.
some of her ethnicity back to the Philippines
Oh, okay.
in
Oh, okay.
addition to Hawaii. Like,
Mhm,
I don't know how long his mom's family had been in Hawaii, but I
mhm.
know that there's Filipinos who claim him as well. My understanding is Bruno grew up in Hawaii.
Hmm,
So,
good.
um, anyways, we're way off of our talking about um the spring. The spring. See, this is what we love. We love that we have a topic and then we
Yes.
take you on journeys, side quests. We
Side
go on side
quests.
quests.
Yes.
So
Did you
today's
want to
yes,
discuss your yes, you go right.
I'm going to lay a little bit of groundwork on this, which is
Yes.
when I was
'Cause
looking
yeah.
up kind of like, okay, the Catholic Church is granted, they've divided the world based on whatever their criteria was. But they're also looking at, um, actually, this is before they divide the world. How do they go incorporating more and more people to within and under the auspices of the church? Because the more people they have under their umbrella, the more powerful they are. And so this is early on, in 601 CE, Pope Gregory the Great created the policy of accommodation. And essentially, it's the foundational document for the Catholic Church of co-opting existing gods, um, places of worship, um, special days under the umbrella of the church. And so finding ways to relate it to things that come back to the church. So he's Pope Gregory the First, and he wrote this in a letter to Abbot Mellitus, dated around 601, and preserved by the Venerable Bede
Mhm.
in his Ecclesiastical History of the English People.
Yep.
So Gregory instructed his missionaries, so this was specific to England in this case, the temples of the idols in the nations ought not be destroyed, but let the idols that are in them be destroyed. Let holy water be made and sprinkled in the said temples, that altars be erected and replicas placed. So Gregory is explicitly recommending that the pagan festivals be redirected and fake pagan temples and places of veneration toward Christian feasting and saints' days, arguing that he who endeavors to ascend to the highest place rises by degrees or steps and not by leaps. This gradualist approach, cleansing and repurposing rather than abolishing, became the template for missionary activity for centuries. So he was not telling them, like the missionaries, to adopt pagan rituals wholesale. So he wasn't saying, hey, take the Spring May Day or Beltane Festival and just take that as it is and say it's underneath the church, but to take aspects of it, to make sure that if the people were used to celebrating on a certain day, that you could relate that celebration to something within the auspices
Mhm.
of the church. So this is how, and it's not all of them. There are definitely arguments that are made that like, oh, this was adopted here or this was adopted there. And somebody else will go, no, that was a calculation that they did. There can be two things can be true at the same time. Okay. But to me, it was fascinating that something that I had just sort of heard of as having been done actually has some rooting or fundamental backing in
Mm.
documents within the church.
Mhm. Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
when it came to European festivals, like one of the ones that's
Oh.
most often called out, and we're going to be talking, Katie's going to talk a bit more about the spring equinox. So, but a lot of times people talk about Christmas and the winter
Mhm.
solstice.
Mhm.
And the thing about it is that the way it gets talked about is they say, oh, well, they did calculations that like the winter solstice is when the sun is reborn. So the sun is born. And then the summer solstice is when the sun is dying. So they related the winter solstice to Christ's birth and the summer solstice to St. John the Baptist. And
Oh, really?
yeah, St.
Mm.
John the
That's
Baptist
weird.
feast day is, I've seen it written both the 23rd and the 24th. But, anyways, it's around summer
Didn't
solstice
he
time.
get his head cut off?
Yeah. So the
Okay.
dying.
No.
He was the one who called most recently forth the fact that Christ was coming. And so the dying of the sun.
Um,
So the
I didn't
summer
know that.
solstice is when the sun starts getting darker and darker. And the
Right,
winter
right,
solstice is when the sun starts getting brighter and brighter. And there's
right.
other schools of
Yes.
thought that go, oh no, this was a calculation. But even when you read those, they're still kind of relating it to the solstice. So whether or
Mm.
not it's directly drawing from
Mhm.
traditions that venerate these or not, there's still some relation to it. Like these are regular things that all humans could see,
Mhm.
and what's interesting to me is that we take a look at them from where we're at. So if we're in the northern hemisphere, what we call the winter solstice is the sun coming back. But in the southern hemisphere, it's exactly the opposite. So I always find that a little bit fascinating, interesting. Um, one of the I'll tell you one of the ones they talked about. The Romans had a
Mm.
thing called Saturnalia, which was originally December 17th, later extended through December 23rd. It was one of the Rome's most popular festivals, featuring feasting,
Mm.
gift giving, exchange,
Debauchery. Mhm.
role reversals, and
Mhm.
decorated trees. From
Oh.
mid 14th century onward, there's evidence of Christians deliberately adapting and Christianizing such pagan festivals. So again, we have the solstice coming into play
Mhm.
here. We're talking about the winter in the northern hemisphere, but
Mhm.
there's already existing festivals around it. There's already
Yeah.
existing um, ways that people celebrate this
Yeah.
particular time. And look, there's scholars who are skeptical about it. So, there's always that. The Norse also had a Yule influence. In Northern Europe, the Germanic Norse festival of Yule was a midwinter celebration involving feasting, ceremonial drinking, and oath swearing. When Scandinavia was Christianized, King Hakon the Good moved the Yule celebration to align with Christmas. And Olaf Trig- Tryggvason, I apologize for butchering that name, later mandated that the celebration be called Christmas. Many modern Christmas customs, the Yule log, the Christmas goat, Father Christmas, Christmas's resemblance to Odin riding Selfnir, trace back to these Norse traditions. So I know I've taken us a little bit out of the spring, but I'm about to get
Sorry,
us back
did you
there.
say a Christmas goat?
Yes.
Oh my God, is there a Christmas goat? Did I miss the goat?
I think that there is a feasting of goat in
Oh,
some traditions,
yeah.
I think.
Okay. I,
So coming back to spring,
okay.
um, Easter and the spring equinox. I'm
Mm.
not going to get into the argument about whether Oster and Easter are the same thing. In Spanish, it's called Pascua, and it is more similar
Mm.
to the Jewish Pesach, Passover. Um,
Oh, okay.
so Bede is the only reference to the Oster, and no other Anglo-Saxon text really get into that. Doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means that there's not a lot of complementary study that
Yes.
shows that the goddess Oster was co-opted into the term Easter. But I think it is fair to look at spring or spring equinox type celebrations, and almost across the globe, it seems like there's veneration in terms of fertility, in terms of seeds and, the light beginning to be more bright. Um, and when they look at like the eggs and the hairs, it's fertility. Now,
Yes.
whether that was just always attached, whether it's attached to a particular goddess or not, I don't know that anybody's really been able to find the specifics for it. But the church putting one of its most venerable um, holidays, because the um, death of Christ and his resurrection is
Mhm.
very much considered, like, in some cases, like the most venerated time.
Yes.
Being around the spring equinox to me is very much aligning with something that was already important to
Mm.
humans. So take it away, Katie,
Yes.
talking a little bit about it.
Well, so you're talking about all of that made me want to tell everyone about some spring myths and some gods from around the world. That is a lot of it is about fertility because a lot of old ancient cultures were focused on agriculture. So everything was very seasonal. And spring is the growth, right? Is the growth period. And actually, I'm really interested in nomadic cultures, like current nomadic. And so their spring celebrations are very focused around their whatever livestock that they are managing, like the Sami. They all have very livestock focused movement of the livestock. We're not going to go into that at the moment, but that's just my plug for nomads. Now, so some interesting mythology. So obviously everyone knows Persephone, ancient Greece, right? Stolen. That's debatable. So she spends 6 months down in Hades, and that's winter, and then she comes back up, and everyone's happy and everything's growing. Great. Um, that's the most obvious. But then we have an Aztec god. He's called the Flayed God. It's very Game of Thrones. So this
Yeah.
is the spring image, and I cannot say his name. I don't know how to pronounce Xipe Totec. So he's the divine deity of spring,
Sick.
spring agriculture and vegetation.
So
Um, he oversees the growing of new crops. He's a disturbing imagery because he wears the flayed skin of a sacrificed victim. It's a costume of death that he puts on. And so it's sort of evoking the old seed, like old cover seed, and then you take it off, and then you've got rebirth, growth. Nice, huh? Yeah. Um, Norse, we're back to Norse. Idun, Idun. I've never heard of this goddess. Goddess of spring and rejuvenation, associated with apples, which symbolizes immortality. So she used to give the other gods apples so they could stay immortal. Apples are very important in that sense. Um, Slavic tradition, we've got two women. Morana, embodiment of winter's deathly grip, and Vesna, spring's rejuvenating force. People burn the effigy of Morana. It's like the ritual killing of winter.
it also, I mean, I'm far from a farmer, but there are traditions of burning, like, the whatever's left over in the
Oh, yeah.
field
Yeah,
in
that's
order
true.
for that to be able to turn into ash and feed the ground
Yes,
just before you start planting. Also, to soften up the ground
that's a
so that
very
you can
good
actually
point,
plant.
actually. Yes. So it may not be as violently as we are reading.
Or it's not quite the horror story
Maybe
kind of.
not quite. There might be a practical reason for it. Um, Here we have a Celtic tradition. I cannot pronounce this either. Cailleach. She's the hag goddess of winter. Oh my gosh. And she shapes landscapes. So when spring comes, she gives way to Bridget, who was later absorbed by the Catholic Church as a saint. And she's the spring goddess. Um, Inanna, have you heard of Inanna? You have heard of Inanna. Oh, you know more about this than I do, I think. She's the goddess, also known as Isis, right? Isn't she like the goddess of love? Right. And associated with Venus, I think. Hmm.
It's
Um,
it's still,
hmm
so
hmm
I think Inanna is, like, maybe whatever came before, like, Isis is the Egyptian, and then you have Venus, like, it's
Yeah,
layering
this is a
on
Sumerian.
Sumerian, yeah.
Yeah. So she is the world's oldest fully documented spring deity. So her husband, Dumuzi, he transforms into the dying and reviving god Tammuz, and the sacred marriage rites of Inanna and Dumuzi were celebrated as he returned from the underworld. Sounds a little bit like Persephone, but it's a guy, isn't it? And then finally,
Before you move on from Inanna, I just wanna
yes.
note the reason I had heard of her
Hmm.
is the first sort of, you can trace her back, the first author, um, f like, ever, like, men or women that's, like, documented, is a
Hmm.
woman who wrote, like, an ode to Inanna,
Oh.
and that was the way I had first heard about her, and of course, I'm blanking on the
Oh,
author's
maybe that's why it said that's why she's the oldest
yeah.
documented. They must have
So, it's like
referred
a
to her.
documented, like, she wrote about Inanna in veneration of her, and she was a priestess of Inanna. So that's the reason I had heard of her. I do not pretend to know very much about
Well, everything I know, I just said. So
her.
you're way ahead of me. And then the last story, this is on not Mesopotamia. So there was something called the Akitu Festival, 12 days. Well, they really know how to party back then, isn't it? They
Interesting
celebrated the
it's 12
spring
days.
equinox. And they reenacted the victory of Marduk over the forces of chaos. I guess chaos is the winter. So but they have to reenact it. They're performing spring into existence. So it's kind of like a quite a mix of, I mean, it's very anti-winter, isn't it? I mean,
Well,
it's a little bit.
I'm wondering if it got changed over time because if you think about the 12 days of Christmas,
Mhm,
um, like, when it was done at one point in the I don't know if this was just England,
mm.
but, it was 12 days of absolute debauchery that
Yes,
was
that's
done
true.
between the date of Christmas and the Epiphany.
Mhm, mhm,
Um, so I'm wondering if sometimes these things got, because the reason I mention that is that, like, some of these ones that I'm gonna talk about that the church did, they actually moved the dates, but kept some of the
mm,
traditions. So I'm thinking it's a long time coming. It's a long time, like, they took the spring
mhm,
festival and moved it because if you put it at the start of winter, it probably suppresses it a little bit just because it's cold out, at least in colder places, so maybe it's not quite as big and prolific as it would be if you were doing it as it's getting warmer.
mm.
Um, but some of what makes me think of that is that, so I'm going to take us to the Americas.
Oh, yes.
And in the Americas, um, so bringing the Europeans to the Americas. They were not the first to
Yep.
come, like, when people actually studied, people from Africa had been, Polynesian people had been to the Americas, people from the north, the Icelandic people had been to parts of the Americas. But we're talking sort of the crux of the Europeans starting to come. And when the Spanish were looking to take over Mexico,
Mm.
what we now know as Dia de los Muertos, or Day
Oh,
of the Dead, and All Saints Day were actually taking traditions that were month-long celebrations. So the folks who lived there at the time that the Spanish first came and conquered, in the ninth and 10th months of their year, would celebrate first in the ninth month, they would celebrate the children who'd passed on for a whole
oh,
month. And then in the 10th month, they would celebrate the adults who had passed on for a whole month.
oh,
And so the Spanish and the church, when they did this, they moved it to coincide with what they had of All Saints Day. And so they made the day before the Day of
um,
the Dead.
right.
Um, but they pulled in a lot of the traditions of venerating those who had passed on.
Mm, mhm,
So this was one, and they moved it. So it would have coincided originally with our, like, August,
mhm,
September-ish kind of time frame, and they literally are moving it into end of
mm,
October. Like, they made it November 1st and 2nd, but those days. Um, just to tell, uniquely in Mexico, November 1st is also called Dia de los Angelitos, so Day of the Angels, and it's
mhm.
dedicated to deceased children. So again, they're pulling that
Oh, right, right.
that thing, and then November 2nd to deceased adults. Now that's specific to Mexico, but still it's an example of
Mhm,
taking existing, adapting them in order to not have outright people go, "You don't know us. You don't know what you're talking about. You cannot possibly be over us."
mhm.
Um, one of the other ones, and this also comes from this area of the world, is La Virgen de Guadalupe, the Virgin of Guadalupe, and Tonantzin. One of the most studied examples, this is of religious, what they call syncretism,
Mhm.
involves La Virgen de Guadalupe, whose shrine at Tepeyac was built on a site previously dedicated to the Aztec earth goddess Tonantzin. And I
Oh,
duly apologize to Tunatsin, as I'm not sure I'm pronouncing her name anywhere near the way it's supposed to be.
sorry.
Yes, truly am, but as close as I can get based on the way they're spelling it.
It's okay. I've angered multiple gods already with my pronunciation. So
Well, I think if we
one
can
more is
be
fine.
humble and acknowledge that we may not be saying it correctly, I think we might be forgiven, hopefully, by the gods. The 16th century Franciscan friar Bernardino de Sagun noted in his Florentine Codex that indigenous people traveled to Tepeyac to worship Tonantzin. And this is the location where people go to
Oh.
venerate La Virgen de Guadalupe. And La Virgen de Guadalupe is a dark complexioned figure. And as such, she resonated with the indigenous population's
Mm.
memory of Tonantzin, who, as an earth goddess of fertility, was traditionally associated with the moon.
Oh.
Academic thesis work at John Cabot University examines how the Spanish Catholic Church reshaped the image of the Aztec goddess, Tonantzin, into the Catholic god icon, Virgen de Guadalupe, which essentially is just
Oh.
the Virgin Mary appearing in this location with this guise and being called, this is my understanding, La Virgen de Guadalupe. And so they
Mm.
using the dissemination of the Virgin's image as a tool for cultural conversion. Indigenous communities, however, exercised agency in this process rather than simply accepting an imposed identity. They maintained core beliefs while outwardly conforming to Catholic practice, which I think was often very common in a lot of these
Yes.
places.
Yes.
Like, I'm going to get into it a little bit more in the Caribbean, but there's a lot of, we understand what you're doing. And in order to make it easier for us to venerate the way we need to, we will conform to your requirements so that we are not killed, or punished.
Yep. Yep.
So in Peru, we have Inti Raymi and Corpus Christi in the Andes. So in Peru, the Inca solstice festival of Inti Raymi, a festival of the sun,
Mm-hmm.
celebrated around June 24th. So this is, again, a little bit more the summer solstice, coincided closely with the Catholic feast of Corpus Christi. Colonial Spaniards saw the alignment as a performative metaphor for the triumph of Christianity over native religion and of Christians over pagan Andeans. The Corpus Christi procession in Cusco, where 15 saints and virgins are paraded through the Plaza de Armas, represents a direct synthesis of Catholic liturgical practice with Andean traditions of transporting sacred mummies and objects to principal plazas.
Yep.
Scholar Carolyn Dean's work on Corpus Christi and colonial Cusco argues that the festival was Andeanized, not simply a case of Catholic overlay on pagan practice, but an active transformation through the engagement of Andean actors and audiences. So this is, again, when I'm taking a look at it going, these folks are looking to continue what they've done. And the Catholic Church is looking for a way to go, oh yes, we said this was okay. This is why. But I also see them as efforts of resistance, of not losing their culture in doing this. It may or may not be the way that it was perceived by the people doing it. But when I'm reading about it, I see forms of resistance kind of like right underneath the noses of those who believe they're in power. Coming into
I
an
I
area.
think though I think the church, I mean the church knows what's happening, but they don't care so much as long as you're towing the main line, right?
Mhm.
And I just finished an Andean archaeology class, and we did discuss this because the last couple one of our weeks was about the European impact, and it was very interesting because exactly what you're talking about. And the idea was that in that particular area, the Andes, who were animists, there was this tradition of mummies, and the mummies were considered alive. So each
Yeah.
of the political families, I think they're called the Panacas. Um, so when the Inca head would die, he had his own Panaca, his own family estate and temple, whatever. And but his mummy stayed alive, and there was like a council of mummies. So you had to, when you became the new Inca, you had to um, get advice and approval from the council of the mummies. I think for the Catholic Church, there were ways that they could infiltrate, right, culturally and religiously. And also the idea of Jesus dying and coming back to life may have been something the Incas or the Andeans could relate to because everything was imbued with life, right? Even dead things have life. So it wasn't such a crazy notion of like Jesus. They can kind of get their head around it. Um, so I don't know much about the Andes, but I did take this archaeology class. So, but it's exactly what you're saying. Mhm.
Yeah, and for me, just the connection of the human belief system, because even as you were talking about some of this, like, I don't, to my knowledge, my elders and ancestors in the Caribbean didn't have mummies, but
Mm.
this concept of communing with your ancestors or receiving guidance from them really rings
Um,
as something that um, was
oh,
done, is done.
what is going
And there is, I don't know how much that is like Catholic Church and how much that is like indigenous belief systems coming through, or belief systems even of like the Africans that were transported. This is like when West African peoples were enslaved and transported
on?
to the Caribbean and Brazil. They brought their religious beliefs with them, and a lot of them were centered on pantheons of deities called Orishas in the Yoruba traditions, or Loa in the Dahomey Benin traditions, and they were synchronized with the Catholic saints. So,
Mm.
example, Chango, the Yoruba god of thunder and fire, was identified with Santa Barbara, whose father was struck by lightning at her martyrdom. And actually, I think of the fact that Urukan, the term hurricane, was in like a Taino god. It's like one of
Mm.
their major gods. It was the god of weather.
Mhm, mhm.
And I could see that all getting incorporated into these
Yeah,
venerations and beliefs.
yeah.
Another one was the serpent spirit Dambala was syncretized with St. Patrick and the one as the
Oh.
one who drove the snakes from Ireland, which by the way, the snakes were the actual pagans. Like Ireland doesn't have snakes. So it's never had snakes. Just a note. Whether the syncretism was deliberate strategy by the enslaved or to mask their continuation of worship,
Mm.
or a step permitted by the church for proselytization,
Mhm.
or an organic cultural process, it's debated. But more recently, scholars have recognized these religions as sort of neo-African, evolving according to their
Mm.
own internal logic rather than simply serving as Christian pagan hybrids. In places like Brazil, there would have been already existing traditions, and in the Caribbean, there
Mhm.
were existing. And I think it's that melange of all of those traditions that make this new thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so some practitioners have since undertaken a re-Africanization through direct contact with with West African sources. So folks
Oh,
who maybe they grew up with one of these traditions are looking at what they would deem the source material.
yeah.
But I just think that time has passed, and those source materials have also been impacted by the other things that have gone on in their neck of the woods in their intervening time. The other thing about these sort of syncretisms is you also have them happening, and I'm not as likely to get into it quite as much, but with sacred sites, like we mentioned the one with La Virgen de Guadalupe. But when I look at all of this stuff, I always love the concept of we as humans finding meaning in our world. And some of that comes from what those who come before us have brought. And I think some of that comes out of what we are experiencing or seeing now. Yet we still have specific moments that as humans we note. Like I think we will always notice the dying of the light and the it's coming back. And, I think we notice, whether conscious or not, we notice like the spring equinox is day and night are equal,
Hmm.
same as the fall. I think we notice things like that, just like we notice eclipses and we notice the tides. Like all of these things are aspects that are of note for us as much as like when people start hearing the birds chirping
Hmm.
because they're doing their dance of spring or it's just their fertility rites. Mm. But I think there are connections, even in our modern world where so much of what we do is interact through screens. I think there's still that aspect of being tied to the tides, to nature, to
Mm.
the world beyond just
Yeah.
what's happening with us.
Yeah. I agree.
And it's why, I mean, we still have a few days until the spring equinox, but
Hmm.
it's why times like that, we as humans, I think, have looked for ways to celebrate it.
Mm. Yes. Yes. Agree.
And I think part of what you were gonna get into is looking at even other parts of the world that we haven't mentioned yet, who do also still have spring rites.
I'm going to close out on things we can do now um, to welcome spring, but it's rooted in the lunar calendar, so it's a little bit different from what we've been kind of talking about now till now. I am going to discuss, and I've never actually knew about this, but it's called the 24 solar terms. It's a traditional Chinese lunisolar calendar, divides the year into 24 periods based on the sun's position. So the equinoxes and all these other things. And it's actually a UNESCO intangible cultural heritage. And you can look it up. So, for example, in Japan, spring actually starts in February. It's a multi-stage process. Around February 3rd, it's officially spring, even though I think it's quite cold still. But that's when you're getting ready to say goodbye to winter. And it starts off with a bang because in Japan, you throw beans at the demons. That's how you start. The concept that you're fighting something evil, and that's the winter. So in Japan, it's very popular. You take these beans, and the people will dress up as like demons, and you throw your beans at them. Then the next day is the official start of spring. So you've got to start out fighting off evil. Then there's like a prayer festival. This is Shinto as well. And you pray for a harvest, so very tied into agriculture, and rice is the main crop in Japan. And you pray for a good harvest, give food to, appease the gods because it's animist Shinto. There's also a ritual planting of the rice. So it's not the actual planting, but it's a performance because you're acting out what you want to happen, which is a very good harvest. So you do that. Um, And then you have the doll festival, which is for young girls to ward off evil. So there's evil again. So, there you go. Um, and there's peach blossoms and rice cakes because evidently in Shinto, peach is a purifying fruit. Did not know that. And it repels malevolent spirits. It must be very tiring because in Shinto, you must be like constantly fighting off these evil spirits and these demons. And then the spring equinox is called the Shumbun no Hi. And in the Buddhist tradition, because Japan is a mix, it's like a shared religion situation, Shinto and Buddhism. So at this point, you go and you visit your ancestors to the graves. You clean the grave, you put some food offerings and stuff like that. And then you also eat this red bean mochi because red bean is supposed to ward off evil spirits. So there's a lot of fighting the evil spirits going on over there in Japan.
We eat a lot of pink and red beans in Puerto Rico.
Oh,
We must have fought off a lot of evil spirits.
also, isn't there somewhere like Ecuador or somewhere at New Year's? Don't they throw beans? I feel like someone told me that.
It's totally possible.
I
It's not
could be
anything.
completely wrong. I used to know an Ecuadorian girl. I felt like she said that, but um, maybe not. I don't know. But beans are kind of interesting. I think you could do a whole podcast on beans. It's very symbolically interesting. Um, but anyway, so that is Japan. I had to put Japan in there. But I thought it would be kind of a nice move into activities that we can do now using traditional Chinese medicine as my baseline. In the spring equinox period, the yin and the yang are balanced. From the spring equinox on, your yang will grow and your yin will decline, right? Because the winter's going away and then you're becoming more active, more mobile. There's growth. In Chinese medicine, this time is symbolized by the wood element. And if you think of like green shoots coming out of the wood and buds emerging after winter, that makes a lot of sense. So new growth. And you're supposed to eat like fresh food, which makes sense because like you've probably just spent the winter eating preserved food or dried food, right? And now you've got things growing. So you eat fresh food, but not raw, just lightly cooked. You don't eat
Mm,
the raw food until later, closer to summer.
okay.
So it should be warming turmeric, cinnamon, cumin, coriander, cayenne. Start to move your energy. The liver and gallbladder are your meridians. And as you physically move your energy, you also move your brain energy. So start planning new projects, be creative. You do something like dance or paint or sculpting and regulate your sleep. But this I thought was interesting, and I thought you would find interesting. Pay attention to your dreams. Now, I delved into this a little bit, so I don't know much about this, but there are the five spirits in Chinese medicine, and one of them is called the Hun or Hun, Hun. And this represents the ethereal soul associated with the liver. So it's the liver. It's responsible for our ability to plan, to make decisions, and engage in long-term projects. Hun, Hun leaves the body during sleep and is connected to the realm of dreams. So when the Hun is balanced, you feel a sense of purpose, you feel creative, you have a direction in life. And when you're imbalanced, you're frustrated, indecisive, and you feel kind of lost in what's going on. But I thought that pay attention to your dreams was very interesting.
Well, some of what's fascinating for me is just that in the tropical zodiac, you have the sign of Pisces starting around February 18th.
Mhm.
And then in the
Mhm.
sidereal zodiac, probably about 20 or so days later, it would start. So Pisces is related to the subconscious, to the dreams, to silver screen.
Oh.
And again, I'm a person who does not recall her dreams. Like, I have to make a concerted effort of laying down and setting the intention over several days that I will remember my dreams for me to remember them. Like, I'm not, and what's fascinating is I come from a family of people where a number of them have prophetic dreams. Like, my mom has prophetic dreams, not very often, but when she has them, she has them. You know, it's common in my mom's side of the family. So, I say I must take after my dad's side because I don't recall my dreams very
Mm.
often. Very rare. Though I've had moments where I've practiced the whole, like, wake up and write down what you were
Oh,
dreaming
yep,
kind of thing.
yep.
I practice it for, like, maybe 2 or 3 days in a row, and then I'm done.
Mm.
Because it is such a conscious effort for me to remember them, which might be why what I do is listen or look for the signs,
Oh,
even
yes,
when I'm
yes.
awake
Yep.
and when I'm reading things. The other thing I will note is you guys may not end up seeing this during Mercury retrograde. It could be that Mercury is direct, but it goes retrograde 3 or 4 times a year for 3 or
Mhm.
4 weeks at a time, and then you have the shadow period before and the cleanup period after. So whenever you see this, it's probably shortly before a Mercury retrograde is happening, and I'm wearing my Mercury retrograde t-shirt.
Oh, yes.
Um, and what I just wanted to note in terms of, like, these aspects of things for you to do, like, whether it's, um, pay attention to your dreams, which I think is always a good idea, especially
Hmm.
for people who remember them. If you remember your dreams, like, it's not that hard for you to do, write down a few notes. Think about what it means for you, because
Mm.
it very well be whether it's you think of it as your ancestors, the angels, God, the universe, however it is that you think of it, it is a mechanism through which you can receive guidance.
Mm.
And the guidance is how you interpret it. You can ask somebody else, but ultimately is what does it mean to you?
Mhm.
And the reason I mention that is that a lot of folks get kind of like, Mercury's retrograde. I can't sign anything. I can't, travel. Look, it happens too frequently for us to be able to, and our current world does not allow you to, like,
True.
schedule 3 or 4 vacations for 3 or 4 weeks at a time kind of thing. So it's more about thinking about what is it good for? And I always like to remind people that Mercury retrogrades are a great time to reconnect with old friends, maybe somebody you haven't talked to for a long time. It is a fabulous time to reread or review or reevaluate something. It's a
Mhm.
really good time to relook at things. If you can, it's an absolutely perfect time to relax. All these things that kind of start with RE, and the reason is
Mm.
Mercury is associated with commuting and communication. So any sort of, like, and when we're talking travel, the reason long distance travel becomes an issue is more due to the communications component that and the commuting to your initial, like, it's more likely if you're in New York City and you're trying to get to JFK, it's more likely that your subway portion is going to be an issue than your actual flight, or that there's a miscommunication that happens regarding a change to, like, I don't know, common one is your gate gets changed, but somehow you've missed it. So you're hustling to get to the gate. I just say these things because I think of them as moments when we're meant to take a beat and pay special attention. Which sounds a little bit, and it's not exactly the same, but when we're looking at this period of they talk about spring starting,
Mhm.
um, and what I thought about when you said that, Katie, was that it's around that early February that you start feeling like the light is coming back. that you start noticing that it stays lighter just a little bit later,
Mm, yeah,
and
yeah,
it's lighter a little bit earlier, so you kinda start feeling it,
yeah.
but it may not be until the spring equinox that it's like, "Oh, we're
Mm,
back to what feels a bit more like a normal day."
yeah, yeah,
Um, and so as we were mentioning, the throughput on all of this are there are ways that we as humans look to organize our world or to acknowledge it or to look at it. And whether you use astrology, whether you use a Buddhist system or a Shinto system or Santeria or something or Spiritismo or Catholicism,
mm,
um, or you pull on the Persian beliefs, or the Jewish or like I believe right now is Ramadan going on. There are so many different ways we can organize, but it's about finding that thing that works for you and being able to celebrate it
yeah,
in the ways that work for you. Because I think almost all cultures, in one way or another, acknowledge or point out things such as the equinoxes and the
yeah.
solstices, and finding the way that that works for you can be something that's truly meaningful in terms of marking the passage of time throughout your year.
Well said.
Thank you guys so much for joining us. Please, I know that we're kind of new on all of this, but we do welcome questions. If there's a question that comes up, even if it's something that we end up answering later,
Or
um,
corrections.
correct. Yeah, like one of the things that brought Katie that brings Katie and I together is that we do love learning.
Mm,
So, if you've got the correct pronunciation of some of the things that we've said, please share. If it's a correction on something that we've put out there, please, again, share if you're willing. Well, we love the aspect of learning and sharing and going over this. I mean, when Katie is sharing, I am oftentimes learning something new myself. So, I hope that you guys will take a moment and do a little bit of that with us. Thank you so much.
thank you. Bye.